Cool. Well, welcome everybody. Uh, this meeting is going to be recorded and posted to the Oats website and YouTube channel for the benefit of those who can't attend live here today. And I'm Nate Powell-Palm, and I'm going to be your host today. I'm the training specialist with Oats. This series is brought to you by the Organic Agronomy Training Service, and this is our 16th episode. Please visit the Oats website to view the call schedule and the list of topics that we've had and that we will have in the future. And if you haven't done so already, I highly recommend everybody signs up for the Organic Advisor listserv. And that's where we have some great conversations about all things advising organic farmers. That's mostly it for the housekeeping. My guest today is Brent Reck, and Brent joined PURIS in 2016. He currently works with organic farmers throughout the United States to seamlessly incorporate yellow field peas into their current crop rotations. And I'm going to kick it off with just a quick request for Brent to give us an intro on his ag background, how he got into agriculture, and then how he got into the yellow pea space.
Thanks, Nate. So just to give a little bit of background, I've been in agriculture ever since I can remember, growing up on a family farm in Southeast Iowa. Little bit of row crop operation, about 40 acres of corn, 40 acres of soybeans is what we typically had when I started. Primarily, our focus was on our cow-calf operation, where we have a purebred herd of Simmental cattle. So grew up that way, exhibiting livestock throughout the U.S. On the family farm operation, staying in agriculture, went to Iowa State University, where I graduated with an animal science major. Right out of college, my wife and I moved back to Southeast Iowa, kind of her family farm homestead there, and started out working as a research agronomist for an independent ag research company. Kind of knew that that wasn't necessarily the direction that I wanted to go. Love the agronomy and the plant side of things there, but more so liked engaging with people. So and being able to see other people's operations and work with them on performance and just, kind of the economics and what growing, which typically in our area was just corn and soybeans, but still, matching hybrids to performance on acres there. So I was more so on the side of things where I was a DSM for a Monsanto company for a handful of years. Worked for Stein after that for 1 year as a DSM as well. Kind of knew that it wasn't necessarily a fit on that side there. I'd been in the background, the Lorenzen family, who Jerry Lorenzen is the founder, CEO and founder of PURIS, World Food Processing there. And his son, Tyler, who had taken over the reins as far as CEO, had been kind of after me for a few years as I went to high school, and really good, friends with Tyler throughout. So it so happened that 2016, it kind of worked where I was able to join PURIS as they were transitioning a facility in Oskaloosa, Iowa, to yellow field pea processing, which at the time I had the only knowledge of legumes was basically that they were, or yellow field peas was that they were a legume. So started working there. I've been with PURIS since 2016. I lead up our supply chain management, or supply chain for our demand on our protein side there with what we process. So I've been with the company since 2016.
All right. Could you talk a little bit about how yellow peas, they seem like in most parts of the country, a fairly novel crop. How PURIS decided that yellow peas was a crop that they wanted to blow up, as it were, and realize, a much larger supply chain, expand geography, get into breeding. Why yellow peas, and sort of agronomically, where do they sort of fit in your head in most rotations?
So yeah, that's really, it's kind of a lot of different pieces there for the question, but a great question. So I know that I'll probably have a couple different segments on that side of things
Please.
from the company side. So to start off, and that's kind of the beginning side of things there. This goes back to the founder, Jerry, with the yellow Lorenzen with the yellow field peas and incorporating them into a breeding program, which is what Jerry really the foundation of our company goes back to the late 80s, early 90s of corn and soybean breeding. With that, though, in the late 90s, Jerry had seen the fact that, hey, looked at yellow peas and being able to incorporate them as seeing that, we need to be able to generate our own nitrogen. We need to be able to have rotations. And that's more so where a lot of the yellow field pea breeding was, and being able to take, a typically Northern Plains crop and start selecting for varieties and breeding that would actually be able to move farther south, be able to take higher temperatures than what we typically would see from the general varieties and the breeding programs from that. So that's essentially where it started with the breeding, was in the late 90s. And then with having those, it wasn't necessarily the idea of the late 90s when Jerry was doing this, that, hey, 2023 is going to come around and we're going to be the largest pea protein isolate maker in North America. That wasn't really necessarily the forethought there, but we had the foundation and the breeding program from that that allowed for varieties to be selected for in the U.S. that could be able to go outside of where the typical wheelhouse would be. Essentially in the 2012, 2014 timeframe, when Tyler started to be involved in the protein side, there was more so from being able to process and have a cleaner protein. So having the pea protein, one of the biggest things too with that is the process that we do can more neutralize the pea flavor. So it allows for more incorporation and adaptability into sports drinks and different applications that the pea protein itself can actually be used in, with our process of being able to take, a 25% or 22% protein pea, turn that into a flour, isolate that protein through a wet process to take it to 80 to 90%. And the other nice thing about it is it's a gluten-free. Obviously, you're looking at dairy-free, you're looking at the plant-based side of things there. And another large aspect is the soy-free. Soy protein is, kind of the largest plant protein that there is. But being able to offer that soy-free product as well has been a big thing there with the pea. So that's really the kind of the foundation and the growth of pea protein here with what PURIS has been able to do.
Awesome. So backing up just a little bit, I think you mentioned that originally the breeding or the genetics that existed were primarily for cover crops or for nitrogen fixation as part of the rotation, and then Jerry was able to breed more for utility.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, there's a few things that when we select for, and a lot of this goes back to even the plant-based breeding from like the soybean side, is, we need to be able to have the nutritional, so, good tasting, the nutritional side of things there too, with the food that we're producing, with the seed. But at the same time, I mean, it has to be economical for a grower too. I mean, it has to have yield. So you have to, and a great agronomic package. So those are kind of the foundations there that were selected upon, as opposed to just maybe looking at it as just a, hey, simple cover crop, and being able to incorporate it in the southern production because it is a short season crop, knowing that, a grower can be able to create some nitrogen from that, change up what their what their diversity is, not necessarily having the end game of where that product would go, but at least being able to have the genetics and the platform there to build upon.
Totally. So could you speak a little bit to where most of the pea protein for PURIS goes? What are those end products that are using protein?
So there's quite a few things when you look at it. I know the first thing that we think of is, okay, plant-based meat. That's really kind of the big thing there. So we do have a product that goes into your plant-based meat products. So we have those. A large amount though, I mean, like we have, for instance, the protein side of things. So like your protein sports drinks that you mix up, for protein powder. A lot of, there's a lot of application into that. Bars, health bars, for instance, like Cliff bars and a numerous assortment of bars that are like a soy-free, just health bar side of things there. Um, there is some other things that we have coming down the line now as well, and you can see a little bit of plug here for our Acre Made team, but we actually are now incorporating, because we actually have a team of scientists, like food scientists on board. So we actually work with food makers as well, as far as designing products that can incorporate the pea protein powder and then be, put basically to a food maker that's then going to take that ingredient of the pea protein and have products that hit your grocery shelves that you'd be more familiar with. But in instance, anyways, like our Acre Made team, we have alternative eggs essentially that are plant-based,
Mm-hmm.
that they're doing as well, and they continue to build on that as far as that available products that you actually can get off of Amazon or through the website as well.
And so we can range from protein shakes over to alternative meats over to eggs, alternative eggs. So it's really, subbing in for protein anywhere in the food ingredient space.
And also, that's another thing too, is like even the starches, like, having food grade starches
Mm-hmm.
that allow for like broths and soup. And it's definitely getting outside of my wheelhouse on the food side. I think I took food science 101, so that's about the in depth that I've got with what those guys do on their side. But yeah, it's definitely a very, very wide array of what peas can be utilized for.
Yeah, pretty cool to see all those applications. As you're on the agronomy side and thinking about how farmers could consider going from a fairly limited scope rotation, like corn, beans, small grain, what are some of the selling points that you feel really carry the message for why folks might consider adding yellow peas to their crop rotation?
I think the biggest thing there, and it's essentially, the biggest thing is the versatility that the peas
Mhm.
allow for. I kind of look at them more like an army Swiss knife, and it's nice because it's just another tool in the tool belt, or another crop that can be incorporated in. Um, and it's not this is a square hole, square peg type deal. With peas is the way that I look at it, and I have seen it, because everybody's operation, it doesn't matter throughout the US. I mean, there's a lot of different shapes and sizes, and what those operations look like that can allow for incorporation of peas and different applications, the way that a grower is going to use them, which makes it really unique in my opinion. So it's one of those that, I remember early on, um, and our marketing team is like, okay, well, we need to have the script, like the game script of this is how you incorporate peas into it. Like, start here, end here. And it's like, okay, there's 50,000 different ways that we can, because you've got different operations. And one of the unique things that I really like, and this is also, I'm sitting here and talking about peas and plant-based company, and being a cattle kid, we have livestock. So being that, I feel almost like a little bit of an ambassador in between, a cow calf operation, a cattle operation of, okay, well, you're going to take my peas and you're going to, essentially have a customer that's going to not buy my, meat product. And that's one of the biggest things, that it's like, okay, we're not in the same wheelhouse here, because the customer that's going to buy, a steak is not going to turn around and buy a plant-based burger typically.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're not really in competition. There's demand there. And that's one thing that I really admire about the American grower, American farmer in general, is that, hey, we are here to feed people. That's, what we do. And if we don't, somebody else is, it is probably going to come from another country. So let's step up. And the great thing about peas, for instance, in a livestock operation, it adds even more versatility than it does in maybe a traditional row crop operation of just a corn soybean rotation, or not a very complex diversity crop rotation, where we are just in such a monoculture. Being an Iowa kid here, we really are kind of in a monoculture of, okay, well, beans are not, doing that well this year for price. The economics don't look well. What am I going to do? I'm going to plant corn. And that's
Yeah.
essentially the only options or alternatives that it had been for, essentially the whole time that I've grown up, in the last 20 some years. So to be able to see peas and be able to kind of think outside the box and have the versatility there is, been one of the biggest things. And like I said, I mean, it's working with a grower, with a farmer, and seeing, because there's different ways that they can be incorporated. I mean, the fact that, if you're south of I-80, Interstate 80, basically, you really could establish a double crop. So even in a corn soybean rotation, you could turn around and go corns, then come back. You could plant a winter cover crop if you would like. Go back in with peas here, late winter, early spring. Take off a pea crop in middle of June. Turn around and plant soybeans. So you're really adding revenue per acre and increasing your output and performance. But at the same time, a cow-calf operation can turn around and, they could winter graze behind peas. They can put down, a sorghum Sudan grass. I mean, they can add tonnage per acre with what they're doing on that side of things. So, I mean, there's a lot of different versatility. You look at the organic side of things there. I think that's where peas really are easily incorporated. I know that we've had some growth curves in some areas with peas, but 7 years now, we've definitely taken huge steps forward as far as weed management goes, with the peas and the incorporation there. But you're breaking up what the typical weed cycle would be as well, because by the time the peas come off, lots of times that weed bank is not going to be there. So even if you necessarily do battle some weeds, you are breaking up a year of weeds.
Yeah.
But there's just a lot of different things there, and then being able to establish a cover crop cocktail, or a grass. I mean, there's just so many different ways, and that's what is really, really intriguing about the peas and putting them into a cropping rotation, is having that versatility and just the adaptability that you can kind of think outside the box and break the mold of what typically has been.
If we're thinking about folks a little bit north of I-80, where they don't quite have the heat days to do the double crop, a lot of our folks on this call and folks who are in the oats consortium are working in that upper Midwest area and working with farmers up there. How do you see yellow peas being incorporated in there?
Yeah, so the way that I see peas being, in the upper Midwest, is being still that short season crop. So we're looking at harvesting, as we get north of I-80, obviously we're looking, 4th of July, 5th of July, somewhere in there, 10th, all the way upwards of northern North Dakota, northern Minnesota. They're harvesting tail end of August typically, is when we're typically harvesting. It still, though, allows for at least getting a decent amount of growth. As far as if a grower did want to come back in with a cover crop cocktail, or maybe some fall grazing. So, I mean, there's a lot of different applications, and then still being able to make sure that you get that established stand, as opposed to planting a crop that may be a fuller season, where you may be exposed to bare ground if your coverage doesn't take.
Yeah.
So it does give a decent amount of ability there, and at the same time, you're being able to. What I like about peas as well is you're gaining a lot of the same principles of a cover crop with a crop that we're being able to take off, yield, have market for. As PURIS, we are a buyer, and I know we'll probably get into that here later as far as what that allows for. But being able to take that crop to yield, have revenue for a year, and at the same time be able to fixate some nitrogen, increase your CEC scores. We've consistently seen peas increasing CECs. Now, since we are taking it to yield, we're not cashing in on the maximum amount of nitrogen that we could get if we tilled that under. So obviously we do have, some fertilizer that, you're not gaining the maximum amount that the peas have, but you're still gaining some in that concept. Another big thing, and this even on our conventional growers and the organic growers as well, with the peas in the ground, you're getting a different root structure with that legume typically as well. So you've got a very fibrous root structure in the top 4 to 5 inches of the soil is where your peas are at. So what we've typically seen as well, and originally when I started for the first couple of years, I'm taking this pretty lightheartedly of producers that have been growing peas for 15 to 20 years, and they're like, hey, 50, out of the years that I do it, it's doing better than my wheat or my corn that next year's 10 to 20 bushel better is what they typically account for. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, that sounds great. But it's pretty proven. I mean, and it doesn't matter if I'm working with guys in Kansas all the way up through, South Dakota, West River, or even east side of the river there. But it is unique. And I've seen side by side growers that have had soybeans and peas, and the peas will out yield, that side by side wheat or corn. That stuff will turn around and it will be 10 to 20 bushel better. So those are some benefits. And, when I'm sitting with a grower, or I'm doing my P&Ls, and the economics of peas for when we're establishing pricing and where we need to be for contracting against these other crops as well. Those are things that I don't take in account for, that I've kind of always looked at as like, okay, this is another added benefit of doing the peas. The nitrogen is there as an added benefit, and then, the yield performance as well. So those are things that, and I've typically seen it in general anyways, when you add more biodiversity in a cropping rotation, you're gonna get better performance out of your soil anyways. So I think that that's typically more so what I've seen with some of those crops that are following the peas, as growers are kind of breaking up what their typical rotation monoculture would be.
As you're thinking about, if we say you have a very basic rotation with corn and beans and maybe a small grain, what is the disease concern between the beans and the peas as both legumes? And what do you think about as far as where the peas fit best in with those other 3 crops as kind of the staples?
Yeah, when I think about those, I wouldn't say that they're simple. I mean, they get to be a simple crop rotation. But essentially, as far as disease pressures go, I know that there's, I mean, obviously the crossovers that we would see would be like your powdery mildews and your white molds would be a couple of those big things that kind of would concern me the most. Another thing, I don't typically like following soybeans with peas because of that soy-free spec. We have not had as much of an issue. We kind of went away from it because we were concerned about volunteer. It hasn't been as big of a red flag. We still work with it. Probably don't necessarily push it from that side. And some of that's definitely the disease pressure. I believe, as we put that in, and it does get a little difficult because we're starting to deal with different soil types. I feel like as we're in more of our arid climates, I mean, that's one thing that I kind of have to typically account for. So as we continually move east, I mean, we're looking at exponential amounts of increase of rainfall from what we're typically looking at for precipitation. Believe that as we get farther east, so like as we get back into the Corn Belt, more traditional Corn Belt, we don't see as much of the disease pressure from that side of things. I think part of that is we get more microbial activity. I think we're more prone to it on those lighter soils, sandier soils, where we're not seeing that typical breakdown as much. I equate that on the disease pressure side. I also see it, on the conventional side with growers where, there's different rotation from herbicides as well on the conventional side there. So the amount of the microbial breakdown of that as well. So I still strongly recommend, if there's foliar applications or, fungicides or, seed treatments on the conventional, we can get away with that. There's a lot more tools in the tool belt there. There is more coming out that are OMRI approved for the
Mhm.
organic. Um, I am I like to see performance. I like to see the efficacies. This kind of goes back a little bit
Yeah.
to the research agronomist in my earlier days is, I like to see the science. I like to see the efficacies. I like to see, that if I'm putting this out, this is what it's going to do and it's going to give me control. And at the same time too, I mean, the other thing as well is variety selection. And that kind of goes back to our breeding program. You know,
Mhm.
um, for instance, I do know that we have a variety that has, and it's one of our varieties that we currently have that has a very good disease package, but it has some susceptibility to powdery mildew. So with that, I'm kind of selective on where we put that. We've got, a handful of brand new varieties that are coming out that will be improved on it. Um, but those are definitely things to take into account with it, and
And so,
trying not to push the envelope too much, and
yeah.
still kind of trying to keep, a grass. I know that it really fits well for the economics of doing peas and then soybeans followed behind. But not that's about the most that I like to push it on that. We will see.
Definitely.
We're going to start doing. We'll have a shorter maturity pea coming out. So we're actually going to start trying to do. We've pulled it off in some years, but we're working on being able to do peas for a first season crop and peas as a second season crop.
Mhm.
Um, and being able to get those both to yield. We put those in rotation where we've done peas basically as that first crop. And then we've had producers that, they'll be like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and the peas are going to come in behind it as well. I'm going to use that as a green crop or, a winter kill crop with a cocktail in it as well. So, I mean, there's different ways to do it. But, as far as the disease pressure, it's something that I would be a little bit mindful of.
And so generally, with any good organic crop rotation, we have, about 3 crops at least. And so as long as we're sticking to a good regular rotation, we don't see any, very acute disease pressures.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Could you speak a little bit? One thing I was reading about with PURIS is just the geographic distribution of all the places. I mean, we went from a Canadian, sort of right on the border of Canada crop to being everywhere. Could you speak a little bit to the breeding program that's allowing you to grow around the US and where you guys are growing for your major production areas?
Yeah, so to start out, I mean, and now looking back at where our footprint is with where we've bred and where we've increased varieties and where we've had, universities and also with just in general growers that we've worked with. Iowa is where it really kind of started with the breeding in the late '90s there, which, like you said, if you look at a crop that was primarily Canadian and north near the border, that's a pretty big change right there in general. So I think that, breeding and selecting for over, 20 years in a higher humidity climate, in, higher temperatures and a longer season there, that gave us a benefit to start with on being able to breed and select for in that area. And then to tie into that, in the later, I believe it was like the 2005 to 2010 timeframe. I mean, the breeding and selecting also was in Kansas. Then when I started with the company, we started, selecting and taking our varieties into the desert. I mean, like we would have been in um, uh, down by Phoenix, Arizona. We've been at Elevation in Arizona. We've been at Elevation in San Luis Valley in Colorado. Um, the Bakersfield, California area. Um, so arid climates on that side of things, elevation and, below sea level as well. And then, we've had stuff in the Southeast US. So Georgia, Florida, we're doing a lot of work in the Mississippi Delta as well. So, and then even to the East Coast. I mean, like Virginia Tech has been doing some trials and stuff for us. So we've been, in Virginia. So, I mean, there's a very wide scope of where our varieties have been and adaptability. Um, Obviously, there's been learning curves on some of those as far as, hitting the wheelhouse of when we want to select for, because we are adding, a lot more variability on what those crops can do. But, and, I mean, we're looking at, things as far as like pest pressures and um, also weather is probably the biggest wild card in some of those
Yeah.
areas. because we are taking a crop that's typically been grown in more arid climates, and putting it into areas where, the seasonal or the average rainfall is 3 times greater, 4 times greater than what it ever would be in a lot of growing environments. So we have been able to have quite a bit of success. Obviously, there's been learning curves through that, that we've built over the last 7 to 8 years. And being able to figure out some of those things has definitely been a lot of things that we've done by trial and tribulations. But there's definitely been a lot of success stories that we've had coming through those.
And so, assuming down in Arizona and the other desert growing regions, you're primarily going to be working with irrigated producers, correct?
Yeah. So in the desert and stuff, I mean, we're typically looking at more irrigated acres.
Mhm.
But with that though, too, and this is another thing that peas really do with where the current landscape is in agriculture of water conservation and water quality, peas really check both of those boxes.
Mhm.
Um, and in the Midwest, I mean, we're talking water quality, we're talking nitrogen leaching, we're talking, I mean, in the Mississippi River Valley and that. So that's a big thing that peas that look at there. But then when you take that, they don't require much water at all. So we're limiting, and we're essentially being able to grow a crop in arid areas where a grower may have a well or an irrigation pivot that where they've either typically had to look at setting it fallow, or they're growing crop that doesn't necessarily make as much, have an end game or a market to it.
Mhm.
That water conservation side of things there is quite significant that those producers can take advantage of.
I am stoked you brought that up. That's where I sort of wanted to go with that question, was just how when we think about in a world of limited resources, as folks are trying to figure out, can they go organic, and possibly they have old wells, they're more limited in the water than say right on the good part of the Ogallala Aquifer. They're irrigated. This seems like something that is both short season enough that you can fit it into not the hottest time of year. It really doesn't like heat units, from what I understand. And so you're getting sort of this maximum conservation opportunity to still get a crop, still fix nitrogen, but do it in a way that's light on the land.
Yeah, and even in the Ogallala, I mean, we're seeing this in, the Panhandle of Nebraska with growers that I work with. Um, there is starting to even be, some monitoring and limitations on the water that
Yeah.
they're putting down. So, yeah, water conservation is one thing that peas, you're looking at, if I remember right, and I'd have to go back and look at some of the studies, but I believe it's about a third of the water use that garbanzos or chickpeas would use is what
Hmm.
dried, yellow field peas would be at. Um, Typically and even in the heat, we'll have producers that maybe once or twice a week, they're making a quick turn. So essentially just giving the peas enough water to kind of cool down is all.
Yeah.
So like we'll
Yeah.
have them make their fastest turn if it's a, quarter of an inch, um, and it's an 8-hour turn. It's like, okay, let's try to target turning that pivot on at 9 o'clock. So by the time that you're hitting the day, in the heat of the day between that 2 and 4 o'clock time frame, you've got 3/4 of the field at least covered, and
Mhm.
you're having that last part of the circle, get covered at that same time. So
Absolutely. Um, Thinking about the opportunity, there's a lot of talk about how do we get farmers to transition. And there's a lot of money that's been going out from USDA for the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. And a big question that I always have top of mind is, what crops do you grow during transition? And how do you build out a crop rotation where you're not just selling your nitrogen, that's going to be very important when you go organic, because you don't have a synthetic option, not just selling it for conventional prices. And so, as you think about farms going through the transition process, do you see yellow peas as a tool in that process?
uh, we have done peas as transition, and we've had some
Hmm.
success with them. To me, and this is, only being involved in the organics and conventional um, for a short time frame. I've been doing it. This will be my 8th season, coming up here in 2024. looking from the outside in, transition year is those are not easy to fit in with a crop. I mean, just and I think no matter what you look at, there's going to be challenges as far as that goes. I believe peas can fit into that. We've done peas completely by themselves. And it can be a coin flip. I mean, as far as getting establishment or, the weed pressure aside from that, there definitely can be challenges from that. We've had some producers, and to me, it's one of those things that I'm the end user. I'm wanting to be able to contract and have peas be the primary crop. We've
Yeah.
seen better weed control management with incorporating, oats with the peas, or I know Northern, they do a lot more barley with peas. I've seen wheat in with peas. I think that peas work really well. Now, as far as me being the end user, am I going to say that I'm going to get the best quality or the best yields out of them? That's probably where I would say that you're not going to want to really count on for, I'm going to plant a crop mix. The mix does the best as far as weed management goes, easily. The things that I've seen that can be issues, and this is where I think there needs to be, more research, more document data points collected, is, matching the variety of the pea with the variety of the oats or the barley or whichever, matching those from an anatomical position, because I've seen where, peas have tendrils, they're viney. They will, I've seen it in wheat and barley for the most part, or even rye, where they will vine on. And then as far as, the head of that wheat or barley or what have you, will actually pull it down. So then that's going to, change up the dry down and cause issues there from that side of things. So more so, I think that it's the anatomy of the varieties and how they coexist. The other thing is that we have what the environment's going to be like that year. How heavy of, oat seeding do I need to go? How heavy of peas, and that's going to vary depending on soil types and environment. But where I'm getting at for myself, I think that, from a weed control management is the biggest thing in that transition.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to have that balance on that side. Now, where I'm getting at for me as the end user is that I've seen where, oats are really, really heavy in this part of the field, or oats really are, the heavier crop this year. And then, given the next year, you could do everything the exact same and the peas overtake. And I know that there's a lot more studies and information from this. Canada has been doing it for quite a while. But I know, even talking to some organic Canadian producers, that they're like, this year was better for the barley, or, it wasn't near the barley that I thought there was going to be. There was a lot more, or more peas. So it can work. I probably lean more towards incorporating, a companion crop with it, just to make sure that we're drowning out as much weed pressure as you can. Now, there is some unique things though too, and this is more towards the Midwest, as far as like weed pressures that peas kind of suppress. So that's one thing that, and perhaps if you know more of the weeds that you're going to combat in a field, perhaps peas can do it. Your early season weeds, like your lamb's quarters and your velvet leaf, can really kind of be those weeds that we can fight pretty heavily sometimes with peas. I mean, like, they can compete, given, if there's precipitation early on and we're a little bit cooler. The peas aren't the most vigorous getting out of the ground and establishing. They'll germ at really cool temperatures. But as far as kind of getting up and having a bunch of plant matter over the canopy and that's where our mechanical weeding has really kicked in. I remember the first time that a grower called me and he had peas that were like 3 inches tall on an organic production. And he's like, hey, I've got all these escapes that are getting ready to come. Like, I've got my, all these weeds that are right there. They're the white hairs are there. And he's like, I'm going to go out and rotary hoe it. And I'm like, not the most certain about that. I said, here's the thing. Just try to limit what you're doing. Go 100 150 feet and see what it's doing. If you're doing more good than bad, I mean, the peas are malleable. I mean, like they will, they'll take that until, you close that canopy where they're typically around 6 inches or so. So I, I never got a call back from that grower until like the next day. And I'm thinking,
Uh-huh.
what happened type deal. And I remember he's like, no, it worked great. I got, peas are bounced up and, I broke everything up. So, we've pretty much tried to incorporate that in organic.
Mhm.
To be honest, we haven't done as much transition here lately by themselves. But I would say with the amount of gains that we've had in the organic, that it's definitely going to help on the transition. But, typically want to do 2 to 3 passes on that. Now, as you get into, and this doesn't matter if we're talking organic or conventional, water hemp is a very difficult weed to
Mhm.
control. I mean, we're seeing more and more technologies as far as the herbicide goes on your traded crops. So we know that it's a big issue in the Corn Belt. And also, um, so like those types of weeds, peas do a pretty good job of out competing. I mean, like I've been in fields that have been next to, um, oh shoot, like traded soybean fields, and water hemp escapes are in the soybean field from Roundup or Liberty, and we've got a pea field right next to it that has zero water hemp. So I mean, like they
Yeah.
do a really good job of out competing some of those weeds that have been a hindrance to us, and that's been kind of one of my things on the conventional side as far as incorporation and adding some curveballs in there to what the typical selection method has been of what our weed pressures have been, because we're going at them just from a chemical side.
Yeah. So fairly, aggressive weed competitors, peas, but maybe not your most aggressive. So kind of starting with a clean field is going to be a good bet for getting a good yield, is what I'm hearing.
Yep. And another thing with that, and we also sell seed and develop varieties. So I always tell this to growers that I hate recommending this, but we definitely see the benefit of it. And I know organic growers that I've worked with are actually thinking, okay, I may even increase my populations more, but by having heavier plant populations, we actually see more of a competitive mutual benefit with the peas. So
Mhm.
we see them, they're more vigorous, and we typically get more height out of them. We get less light penetration through the canopy,
Mhm.
that we close the rows quicker. So I mean, and then on top of it too, I mean, you pair in the fact that we're doing mechanical um, weed maintenance essentially, by going through with a rotary hoe or an Einbach. You can get more aggressive if you have more plants out there. Another thing too is peas don't like wet feet. So especially as we get into the heavier soils, as we increase that plant population, if we do have heavier rainfall events, um, you've got more roots out there in those saturated soils to kind of be able to take that surface area away of just putting it all on a smaller amount of roots. So if you have more roots out there, it actually does give more ability to handle some of those wetter soils.
Could you speak a little more specifically about plant population recommendation
Yes.
for your planting rate?
Yep. So as we get, and this varies, typically I think in the past we've used way too much of a blanket. And if you look, a lot of times you'll see peas and it's like, okay, 3 bushel to the acre, 180 pounds to the acre, you have a 60-pound bushel. And that's kind of the blanket of what you want to plant. Um, and rule of thumb, yeah, that's probably a pretty decent side there. But there's a lot of things that get overlooked in that. I mean, seeds per pound is a huge difference. I mean, I've seen years where you've got guys that have 1,800 seeds per pound up to 2,800 seeds per pound. So already there can be a huge difference as far as what actually is going in the ground. So that's why when I kind of talk about it, I like to talk the seeds per acre to start with, and then then look at the seed lots that you're using and
Sure.
the seeds per pound,
Yeah,
and
and
go
translate
from
that.
that angle. So typically rule of thumb, what we've used as a blanket is like 385,000 seeds per acre.
Mhm.
Now I've worked with producers as we get farther west in the more arid climates, And, we have some varieties that really bush out and stuff too. So I'm not as concerned on that. But, we can see those populations drop down to 250, 275,000 seeds per acre. I typically like to be stronger than that, but I know that there's been producers that have been doing it for a longer time and see that and know their environment. So I kind of like to baby step from there if we can. But at the same time, like I want to maximize what a producer's yield is. So, like I said, that's probably more the arid side of things, and that's really getting to make sure that you've got even like your singulation and plant spacing correct at those lower pops. On the organic though, I would say 385,000 is kind of where I'm like fine with for conventional. On organic, I like to be more that 415,000, 420,000 seeds per acre. Just to be able to get more vigor out of it. Typically, if we're in heavier soils, they can handle that as well. If we have rainfall events that, moisture is going to stay there longer as well. You're not going to get the filtration as quick through as like what you would in your sandier soils, lighter.
Absolutely.
So typically we're pushing that more. So it really varies on what the environment is, what soil types. But I mean, those can be the ranges as far as what that is. And I have some producers that, after this year, they're like, hey, I'm going to try and go 450,000. I just, they've seen where, and you can see it because, and it is nice that a producer can see it other than me being a, seed agronomist and, but at the same time, like I'm the end user. I want to maximize yield because we need that supply. So it's not like I'm just out here being like, yeah, buy more seed.
Right.
No, I want to make sure that we're seeing growers succeed and have supply that in turn we're bringing in. So those are the things from that. But I've had producers that are like, hey, I'm going to try 450,000 seeds per acre. And they've seen where, if they're at their headlands and they make, or leave the drill down or the air seeder down and they make a second pass, and no, it's not economical to double the plant population, but you can see how much thicker, how much taller, how much more aggressive those plants are still at that doubled up plant population. It doesn't matter if it's drought or wet conditions, you're still seeing it. So when you see that, you kind of like, what am I still leaving on the table as far as that economic threshold of what my input cost is versus what my yield return is?
Absolutely. It's very rare that I get to talk about my background picture because it is yellow field peas. And I would just echo everything you're saying about that planting population. I always go for 200 pounds at minimum, if not pushing it up a little higher, and have realized those same benefits of, it's just a shag carpet and you can shake one corner of the field. The rest of the field shakes because they're all tendrilled together. And it is a real great mat, just keeping everything down, pushing those weeds down, growing on each other. So yeah, I think that's huge. For the mechanical weed control component of that, would you say there's a percentage you should overplant for the expectation that you're going to have some loss?
We haven't really calculated it as far as that goes. Typically, at the stages that we're going and weeding those peas and the aggressiveness, we're not doing a lot of damage because the growing point's still, below. But I think it's probably safe to at least say, hey, on average, 5%,
Sure.
is what we'll probably end up doing for damage from that side. But, especially your first two passes, if you're going, when the crop is 2 to 3 inches out of the soil, so you still have a lot of malleability in that pea plant, you're not going to do as much damage as if you're going through after those or like at the point of when the tendrils are starting to go, because you're going to have more mechanical damage to those peas at that stage. So, but you still get quite a bit of malleability in those peas as far as being able to bounce back at those stages.
Absolutely. We've got about just a few minutes left, and I would encourage anyone in the audience, if you have any questions for Brent, please just throw them in the chat box and we'll get them answered. Could you speak a little bit, Brent, about the buying programs? A lot of the folks on this call are advising organic farmers, and those organic farmers are going to say, what's a contract look like? And we're not going to hold you to it, but just high level, what kind of regions you buy in, what your contracting looks like. I think in your bio you had mentioned that PURIS is there's sort of a progressive buying program with full acreage contracts. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so those are some benefits that a grower has of being able to plant, Pieris peas and grow for Pieris is the fact that we offer total production, full active God contracts. So we have a set price on what our bushels will be. Can kind of give you probably, I mean, I think we're going to be close to where we were last year. I haven't been able to sit down and do P&Ls against other crops yet. Or our supply and demand there with the peas yet. But here in the next few months, hopefully we'll be able to kind of solidify that. So we'll have pricing, coming. Typically, we're pretty aggressive with other crops in the area because we do make sure that we're pricing against those P&Ls. So and as far as that goes, we typically like to do like picked up contracts just because of the allergen control. So that is another nice thing on that side. Now they are year-long contracts, so like we'll do a buyer's call that will enact, if basically from harvest until like August of the next year. We like to get movement before, obviously, and make sure we get bins poured out from that side. But we do buy throughout the entire U.S. I mean, obviously the economics have to make sense for a grower. But the total production, so we buy every single contract, bushel that a producer grows on those acres at that set contracted price. And then full active God. So, I mean, those are things that we obviously can't control. There's no penalty, fine, fee, or anything like that. I mean, if a field is hailed or, weed pressures or flood, those types of things, I mean, it's essentially like, hey, let's get in touch. Let's see if there's corrective measures that we can make. At the same time, a producer is still going to be safe from that as far as being able to go out and grow the crop. And if there's not a crop to deliver on, then, that's unfortunate for a grower. It's unfortunate for us as a producer or as a buyer. But that's part of our risk mitigation, though, by buying throughout the entire U.S. Is we will have some of those events that are just uncontrollable, and those are things there. I did see, so I'll hit up the insurable real quick because that kind of ties in here.
Sure.
So it depends on where a producer's at. Obviously, we're trying to get where that insurance is being able to establish through more of the U.S. So we are, obviously producers that have went out on limbs for, the last 7 or 8 years, we are having availability of yield. So then that way a producer can kind of have that for a T yield, kind of pull that over. And as they go through their years of building up what their T yield can be. On the organic, we've had a lot more producers, and I think it's actually a little bit more common knowledge to organic as opposed to like the conventional side where you have your federal crop insurance. That's just like the standard. But being able to do, there's a lot of underwrites that can happen. So you can do like a whole farm, or you can go through and have an underwriter write a policy, either like a revenue protection on it, or it is typically, I believe, the way that they go. For a coverage program, or like the whole farm, which whole farm I know gets tricky because you're looking at, the entirety of the other crops that you're growing. So there is availability. It's just a matter of where you're located as far as the crop insurance side of things go. And I know that there's times that if we have to, we can, try to work with producers on being able to say, hey, we have some proven history here, but it's just, case by case. How to harvest. So that is one of the things. It's on the organic side, I would strongly recommend swathing and then putting that in a windrow, letting it cure for 2 to 3 days, up to 5, kind of just depending on what the weather's like. I mean, I equate it a lot to like, hey, I mean, it's just a matter of, what drying conditions are. With that, you want to, and the swathing, you want to get there before the plant's dried down already. So we definitely can work with producers on like, hey, typically rule of thumb is I like to see them about 2/3 of the way dried down. Um, is where I like to see. So still a little bit of green, yellow in them, but those things will ripen off and turn into good yellow peas for us. And then you can use a pickup header to do it. Now I have other producers that go ahead and they direct cut. I have organic producers that can direct cut, and that's just going to come down to what the weed pressures are like. Obviously, as you get into more arid elevation, typically those producers are more able to direct cut as opposed to having to swap.
Yep, I've gotten away with direct cutting all of mine.
Yep.
But we get dry and we stay dry in August.
One thing is though, like a draper will work. They do have an attachment that it's crossfeed auger basically at the backside of the head there, that will pull the peas into the middle. That is by far the slickest. Now, there's a lot of producers that I'm like, hey, you're not going to want to, you're trying peas. You're not going to go out and, buy a completely different header for this. That's what I like about peas, though, too, is lots of times we don't have to change much for equipment and infrastructure that we've got, So a lot of the equipment that producers already have, they don't have to go out and add to what they have. So that's one nice thing. But it does, if you're going to use just a regular draper head with a reel, it takes a little bit of touch, especially as we get more into the Corn Belt, the Midwest, where we have those higher, mass of what the peas are themselves for plant material. Because, once you get them in, they are easy, heavy test weight typically. So, like you can typically get aggressive with your cleaning as far as your air, rotary spacing, those types of things. But it's more so just getting them in. You don't want to run that bell speed too fast underneath of them where it's not grabbing any of the peas in your platform head or your draper turns into a bulldozer is not what you want.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Brent, so much for your time and your expertise. And I'm sure folks will be getting in touch with some questions. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I just threw a link in the chat for the organic field crop course, which is launched and is enrolling new cohorts all the time. So please check that out. We're going to have another call next month about on-farm organic research. So please join us for that as well. And just a great shout out again to your expertise, Brent. We really appreciate it and wish you well as you finish out the season.
Thank you. Thank
All
you,
right,
everyone.
take care, everybody. Yes, thank you.